Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a defiant thing to say, isn't it? Good morning. Because sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's horrible. Sometimes the morning brings nothing but trouble. But we say it nevertheless. Good morning. Good morning. So we're having a fresh look at the biblical Christmas story. And what we learned last Sunday was that the Christmas story was first told to a group of Jewish people by a man who would later be known as Saint Matthew. And the interesting thing about Saint Matthew's Christmas story is that he begins it with a decidedly unsaintly list of Jesus' ancestors. And the unsaintliness of Jesus' own family background is spectacularly unusual in its historical context. Because in the ancient world, a family tree was the equivalent of a resume, in that it was one of the ways that you introduced your credentials to other people. And in that regard, just like a resume, a family tree was always edited to accentuate the good, in many cases fabricate the good, and to omit the bad and the negative. So when you are putting your resume together today, what do? You kind of lie and tell the truth, right? So if you graduated from university, you'll definitely mention that. If you volunteer at a hospice somewhere, you'll definitely mention that. However, if 2 years ago you lost your driving license because of a DWI, you'll probably not put that little nugget of information on your resume. If you lost your last job because you were persistently late, you probably won't mention that on your resume. Similarly, when a first century Jew was putting his family tree together, he was extremely selective with his use of information. So, for example, if one of your ancestors had been a professor at a top rabbinical school, definitely that gets on the list. However, if one of your ancestors had married his first cousin and was a degenerate gambler, that information would definitely not make it onto the list. So when Matthew, in the first century, is putting together Jesus' family tree, the expectation is that the genealogy Matthew writes will be edited in such a way that deliberately accentuates or fabricates the good and intentionally omits the bad and the dirty. However, spectacularly, Matthew chooses to do the opposite. He seems to deliberately include the names of people whose life stories were nothing short of miserable and despicable. This morning, we're going to look at sentence number 5 of the Christmas story. Sentence number 5, in fact, of our book of faith, the New Testament. Look at what it says. Here we go. Salmon was the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. A few years back, I did a course on screenwriting at the University of Toronto, and one of the things I learned was that in a screenplay, there is no room for a wasted word. So the average length of a Hollywood screenplay is about 100 pages. Each page of writing represents 1 minute of screen time, and so obviously every single word that makes it onto the final draft of the script has to count. There is no room for unnecessary frivolous information. Everything that makes it onto the final draft has to take the story forward. Everything has to mean something. One of the mantras of screenwriting is that all of the movie should be present in every single page. And this isn't a modern notion. This predates the New Testament, in fact. One of Aristotle's golden rules of storytelling is that all of the information in the story should take all of the story forward to its conclusion. It should all serve a purpose. So you can be sure, you can be very sure, that when St. Matthew chooses to write this particular sentence at the very beginning of his important story, he does it intentionally. There's no frivolity here for him. This information is not unnecessary. Quite the contrary. This little nugget for Matthew takes the story forward to its triumphant, happy ending. The information itself comes from a well-known story in the early part of the Old Testament, the book of Joshua. Let's have the first sentence on the screen and we'll learn it together. Joshua 2 verse 1. This is what Matthew's thinking of as he writes this sentence in the Christmas story. We are told that Joshua, son of Nun, that's son of none, not son of a nun. That's a whole other story. He secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. Now, this story comes from an era that historians today call the Late Bronze Age collapse. For some reason, no one knows why, about 1200 BC or so, every civilization in the world goes into terminal decline. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, for some reason they all begin to unravel. There's almost no city in the world that goes unburned during this period. And so all over the world, during this era, tribes, clans, entire nation states begin to move around the world in search of better fortune. It's in this historical context that we read the Bible's Exodus story. You'll remember in that story, the people of Israel leave Egypt, whose power is now going into rapid decline, along with everyone else's in the ancient world, and they go to the promised land in search of a better life. Now, the problem with migration in the ancient world is that you can't just move your clan into a new area and set up shop, because the people who already live there tend not to like it. So in the ancient world, what happens is this. My clan are going to move into your valley and set up home. But before we set up home in your valley, we're going to have to kill all of you people and burn all of your houses and get rid of every memory of you. In the ancient world, warfare goes hand in hand with ethnic cleansing. So in this sentence, Joshua, the leader of Israel's army, is about to take his people into their new geographical home, into what he hopes will be their new geographical home. And the first obstacle he faces is the ancient city of Jericho. Jericho, as you perhaps know, goes way back. Probably the oldest city in the world. When our species first decided to give up the life of hunter-gatherers and organize themselves into civilizations and pool their resources, Jericho was the first place they chose to do it. It predates the Bible by thousands and thousands of years. So fair to say, in that time, they've learned a thing or two about defense. Furthermore, prior to the Late Bronze Age collapse, Jericho is one of the most important trading cities in the world. It's got a lot of money. And with that money, one of the things Jericho does is build a very elaborate wall around its city. So Joshua knows that if he's going to take his people into the Holy Land, he's got to break Jericho. And if he's going to break Jericho, he's going to have to break its walls. So he does what soldiers do. He sends spies on a secret mission. And you've seen the movies. You've seen all of them. They have to find out stuff like how many soldiers they have, what their morale is like, where they're placed, what kind of weapons they use, that kind of thing. And this particular piece of espionage would have been undertaken with some degree of trepidation. Jericho, remember, has been doing this a long time. They're well practiced in the art of defense. Surprising then to read in this ancient nugget that when these 2 spies set out on their secret mission, a mission the success of which influences all of their people, the first thing they do, we are told, is they go to the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. And I say that's surprising because this sentence, the word stayed in this sentence, is a translation of the Hebrew word shakav. And shakav means to lie down. And as is so often the case with words, the meaning of the word depends entirely on the context. So if I were to say to you that after church today I will, if my children permit, go into my bedroom and lie down, you would immediately understand that what I'm talking about is taking a nap. A well-earned nap. However, if I were to say to you that after church today I were going to go to a gentleman's establishment in downtown Toronto, the kind of place with dim lighting and you know the drill, and go into one of those rooms that they probably have through the back and lie down, you would understand that I'm using the word lie down in a slightly different context. So here there are two spies. And in the best traditions of James Bond, they go into an establishment where the lighting is soft and the women are scantily dressed, and in that establishment they shakav. Need I say more? Why? Why are they doing this? Is it because they're young soldiers doing what young soldiers do? After all, I presume knowing that tomorrow you might die adds a certain urgency to whatever libido you may have. Or is there more to it than this? Are these young spies going into the house of the rising sun to lie down, knowing full well that after the act of lying down is finished with the obligatory post-coital cigarette, there comes the obligatory pillow talk, and who knows what valuable information they'll pick up then? Who knows what other people these women have been lying down with and what secrets they may tell? This kind of thing and spying do go hand in hand after all. Now this is relevant to Matthew's Christmas story because the woman from whom these spies are hoping to learn something is Jesus' great-great-great-great-grandmother. And she works in the adult entertainment industry. And there is simply no way to church up that particular nugget of information. And before we get on with the rest of this sordid late Bronze Age story, let's pause on that for a moment and say that it is interesting, is it not, that Saint Matthew, writing to the early Christians, makes a deliberate choice to include this unsaintly woman in Jesus' family background. Remember what Aristotle said, information Matthew knew. Every piece of the story should take the story forward to its triumphant, happy ending. I'm going to tell you about Jesus, Matthew is saying. I'm going to tell you a story that changes absolutely everything about this life we live. Good, bad, sad, happy, trouble or trouble not. And before I get into the details of the story, I need to give you a little indication of where this story is going. Jesus' great-great-great-great-grandmother was a prostitute. Matthew has a choice. He can include that particular nugget of information, or he can leave it on the cutting room floor. And as he makes his choice, he knows full well there's no room in his story for unnecessary, frivolous details. Everything that makes it into the final draft must drive the story forward. So why include this? Why not just ignore it? I'd ignore it. Telling you right now, I'd ignore it. While we're thinking about that, let's read on. The king of Jericho was told, "Look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land." So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, with whom he was apparently on first name terms. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy the land. Why does the king know her? Why does the king know where her house is? Maybe all the men in the city know who she is and where her house is. Clearly she's a woman immersed in her own culture. Clearly she is one of her own people. And so in this sentence she's being told, bring out the two spies who are upstairs lying down. This could not have been a remarkable event for her, not in her career. I presume, given what she does for a living, she's very used to law enforcement banging down the door, demanding that people be brought out and that stories be told. Look at what she does next, however. The narrator tells us that she'd taken the two men and hidden them. Once they were safely ensconced, she said to her interrogators, "Yeah, the men came to me, but I didn't know who they were." And then at dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they didn't even stay the night. They left, and I don't know which way they went. And then she tells another lie. She says, "Go after them quickly, you may catch them." But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the flax which was there. Flax looks like this, long bits of grass. So question for you, put yourself in the shoes of these two soldiers. You're a spy, yeah? You're on a mission behind enemy lines. You've just tried to elicit information from a prostitute. You're sitting in bed, propped up against a headboard, trying to get something from the pillow talk that will be useful to your mission. Halfway through this conversation, you hear a loud knock at the door and your gut sinks because it's the Gestapo. And to your total surprise, this prostitute, whom you didn't even know an hour earlier, hides you under vegetation and tells a lie on your behalf. Why is she doing this? She's got nothing to gain and everything to lose. Is it because she's serious about client confidentiality? Or is there something else in this dangerous game she plays? They don't have to wait too long before their questions are answered. In the next sentence, once the Gestapo have gone, before the spies shakav, again for the night, there's that word again, she goes up on the roof and says to them, "I know that the Lord," and the word Lord capitalized there is the personal name of Israel's God. Okay? "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you." So this is good information if you're a spy. Now you know what morale is like. Now you know what your adversary thinks of you. Now you know how brave they are. "We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea when you came out of Egypt, and the stuff you did to Sihon and Og, the kings of the Amorites, whom you completely destroyed." How did you destroy them? Yeah, I'll come back to that ugly word later. In other words, we've all heard, it's all we're talking about, how brutally effective you are at that thing you do. When we heard it, our hearts melted because of you. This is something you need to wire back to your handlers right away if you're in the information game. Because now you know that the men who are standing on Jericho's technologically advanced wall are not brave. And as the mighty Khan said, a wall is only as good as the men defending it. Then look at what she says next. She says, and remember who's saying it, "The Lord your God is God in heaven, heaven above and on the earth below." When the two young intelligence officers entered her softly lit establishment, they'd have been hoping that in the course of all the drinking and goings on, that one of the women who worked there would have let something slip that would have been relevant in their mission. These women had pillow talk with all sorts of men in the town, soldiers, leaders of the municipal establishment. They would have all have gone there. Pretty good plan. However, in this sentence, they discover that not only is Rahab a good source of information, she's in fact now willing to act as an agent on their behalf. She's willing to become a Bronze Age Mata Hari. Now this woman is not a Jew. She's a Canaanite. And as such, this woman is raised to have very firm ideas on who God is in heaven above and on the earth below. In her worldview, El and Elyon and Dagon and Moloch and Baal and all these people, they are the gods in heaven above and on the earth below. And for her to now say that the God of Israel is God is for her to say that her gods are not. It is for her to say that when it came to being handed out gods, her and her people were at the back of the line smoking a joint. But before we get excited about this particular profession of faith, let's pause for a moment. She has thus far revealed that she's not the only one who feels this way. She's revealed that everyone, in fact, in the entire city has now come to a place where they accept that their gods are rubbish and that the God of Israel is the true God indeed. The entire city believes this, apparently. That is a statement of faith, and it's a big one. It is as much a statement of faith as you and I saying, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, of things visible and invisible, of his Son Jesus Christ, crucified under Pontius Pilate, buried, died, rose again on the third day, blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is we say when we confess our faith, that is just the same as this. That is, it is a statement of belief that says, here's the information I think is true. But faith, properly understood, is not about things we believe to be true. Faith, properly understood, remember, is always a verb. It does not mean I believe stuff about God. That's not faith. Faith is, I believe stuff about God. And the stuff I believe about God changes me. It changes the way I think. It changes the way I behave. It changes the way I endure. It changes the way I go through the stuff I got to go through. It's not that I believe things in my head. It's that what I believe changes the life I live. Good, bad, sad, happy, trouble or not. In Christian thinking, there is always an indivisible relationship between what we believe and how we are. So although all our people in the city believed exactly the same stuff that she believed, she alone, it seems, is willing to allow her belief to translate into behavior and action. And so she says, swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sign that you will spare the lives of my father and my mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. As a slightly bitter, twisted aside, I don't see why she should be concerned about her father and mother, brothers and sisters. Her father, mother, brothers and sisters aren't concerned about her. Last week I taught you that in the ancient world, an unmarried woman is the responsibility of her father. It's her father's job to look after her. Why is she working in a brothel? Why she ended up where she ended up? Where's her family when she needed them? So now I think very well of her. She's willing to look out for the people who did not look out for her. The soldiers respond in the affirmative and say, as long as you keep this all secret, we'll treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. Then we're told she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. So the idea of a prostitute having a window in the city wall was, and indeed is, stereotypical. So, for example, those of you who've been to Amsterdam or somewhere like that will know that people who work in this industry sometimes display their wares in a window on a wall for obvious reasons. This happened in the ancient world as well. Have a look at this. So this is a famous carving from a place called Nimrud, round about the same era as Jericho. And it's called The Woman at the Window. And what this woman is doing is she's saying, here I am, I'm available, I'm open for business, hanging out the window. It is out of a small window like this, a woman exactly like this lets the spies escape and go back to report to Joshua. So that's kind of how that part of the story ends. Fast forward a few months. The soldiers come to Jericho. They do their thing. Read this. Joshua said to the two men who'd spied out the land, go to the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, as you promised. So the young men who'd done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to them, nieces, nephews, the whole deal. They brought out her entire family and put them outside the camp of Israel. They were still persona non grata. They weren't Jews, they weren't good enough, they were outside the camp. Then the last line of the story says this. Here's what Matthew's thinking. They burned the whole city and everything in it. Okay. It may horrify you to know that the concept of jihad, of holy war, wasn't invented by angry Muslims. It was invented 800 years before the Quran by the writers of the Bible. And they had a different word for it, haram. And the idea was that as our tribe moves into the valley where your tribe is living, we will kill and burn everything. Not just the soldiers, you understand, but the women. Not just the women, you understand, but the old people and the children. And not just the old people and the children. We'll even kill your donkeys and your goats because we need no memory of you to survive. And only once we have cleansed your ethnos from the area will we come in and set up home and establish a new culture and civilization. And I draw your attention to this because it's just ugly. And in the course of his research, put yourself in his shoes, yeah? St. Matthew's sitting down, he's getting towards the end of his life, and he needs to pass on the story of Jesus and the story of Christmas to the early church. And in the course of his research, he uncovers this information about one of Jesus' ancestors. She is a woman who works in the adult entertainment industry, and that's not even the worst part. She is a traitor to her own people who participates in the genocide of an entire city. A genocide described by the word burned. Holocaust. Matthew uncovers this story about one of Jesus' forebears. By no stretch of the imagination is this person anything other than the scum of the earth. No reasonable thinking person could come to any other conclusion. And so St. Matthew, as he writes his story, has a clear choice. He can work her detail into his final draft of the Christmas tale, or he can leave it on the cutting room floor. And every single storyteller in the ancient world would have left this story on the cutting room floor. Why wouldn't they? This family skeleton would have stayed buried firmly in the closet. But not Matthew. Not Matthew. Matthew deliberately works this ugliness into the opening chapter of his Christmas story. This begs the question, why? Why does the story of the New Testament not begin with once upon a time? Why does it not begin with a galaxy far, far away? Why does it not begin with some semblance of idealism, of a fairy tale? of a beautiful life. Why does it not begin like that? It seems that the story that saves us all is grounded in the lives of real people who lived messy, disappointing lives in a messy, disappointing world. And you don't hardly need me to remind you, but in the real world, bad things happen. In the real world, Plan A hardly ever works. In the real world, none of us are the men we hope to be all of the time. In the real world, none of us are as sober or as chaste or as charitable or as faithful or as kind or as dedicated as we would wish to be. In the real world, we do ugly things and we make mistakes. In the real world, things break. In the real world, things hurt. In the real world, big corporations don't care about auto workers. In the real world, bad things happen every single day. That's the real world. And here is the clue this episode gives to its readers. Jesus is thoroughly immersed in this real world of ours. Jesus, it seems, is not ashamed at all to be with sinners who live broken lives and who themselves contribute to the brokenness. He is unashamed to be with people who are not all they would wish to be all of the time. He even is willing to include those people in his very own family tree. And as it were, put their portrait on the wall. That's where I'm from. And for those of us who live life somewhere between a life badly lived and a life sadly endured, it is good to know, I think, that Jesus is a friend of sinners and that he welcomes them. In the story that saves us all, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. Let me pray. Our Heavenly Father, we wouldn't for a moment wish to follow any of Rahab's example, save one. We, like her, would like to allow the things we choose to believe in our heads to make a difference in the way we live this life. And so we affirm again our faith. We believe that you are God in heaven above and on the earth below, the maker of all things, visible and invisible. We believe that you love us. We believe that you know exactly what we're going through, and that in that knowledge you love us. We believe that in your love you sent your only Son to be our Saviour, to live life on our behalf, to die death on our behalf, to be buried on our behalf, and to rise again on our behalf. Believing this, we choose to have hope for the week ahead. We choose to have strength for the week ahead. We choose to face whatever comes in the next 7 days with an unyielding optimism that the story of everything, of us included, has a happy ending. That the final chapter for us is one of triumph. Because you have willed it so. Be with us then and those we love. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.